And so tonight, what we would like to do is we're going to clarify what the NUSD GATE program is and the progression as students move through it. And then we're going to review the identification process and how parents of third, fourth, and fifth graders can get their children screened and reevaluated. Or opt it out. And we're also going to be talking about our GATE leadership team that comes together 4 times a year. And Jen will be giving you some information about that. And then we want to leave a nice chunk of time to address your questions. Because it is a small group here, don't feel like you have to save your questions for the end. Go ahead, just raise your hand, as we're talking. And we'll try and answer your questions as we're going through the slides. So first off, what do we define as giftedness? And so here at NUSD, it's really looking at students with that potential to perform at very high levels in academic fields when compared with others of similar background and experience and age. So that's key when we're looking at students, that we're looking at them in like student groups. The other thing is that we believe that youth possessing these abilities are found at all cultures, populations, economic levels. So we are exhaustive in our GATE identification when we're looking at different student groups in terms of identification. And we recognize that these students have special needs, that they need a little bit more to engage them more deeply in the curriculum. So the progression as you move through the GATE program is students are screened in 3rd or 4th grade. So typically it's 3rd grade, but if a student is not identified, they can opt to be reevaluated in 4th grade. And we also have students who are new to us that come in 4th grade. And those students who are identified as gifted can choose between 2 pathways. They can either choose to go into the GATE 4th or 5th self-contained model at Linwood, or they can choose to stay at their neighborhood school and go into what's called a cluster classroom, where the students are grouped with other GATE-identified students. And if a student is identified in 5th grade, then they would just filter into a cluster program in the middle school. And at middle school, they're clustered in language arts and social studies. And Jen will talk more about what that middle school program looks like. Any questions about the flow of the program? Okay, great. So parents often ask, well, what are the main differences between a GATE cluster class at a neighborhood school and the self-contained class at Linwood? There aren't too many differences. The biggest difference is that in a cluster model, the numbers are usually smaller of the GATE cluster. So an ideal number is about 6 students. That's going to vary year from year, school by school, depending on who gets identified. So that does change. And then the teacher has been trained to deliver a differentiated instructional model to address those students' needs. At the self-contained model at Linwood, the students are grouped with other students who have been identified to receive GATE services. So that self-contained class just contains GATE-identified students. And that is both in 4th and 5th grade as well. So Jen's going to talk a little bit more about what the middle school program looks like.
So while we're here tonight to talk a lot about the identification of GATE students, we wanted you to have a little bit of an idea of what happens once they move into the secondary schools. We do continue with GATE services through 8th grade. we have only a cluster program in middle school. So after they leave elementary school, regardless if they're coming from the Linwood Self-Contained or one of the other schools' cluster programs, they move into our comprehensive middle schools and they have a cluster program. All students who receive GATE services receive those services in a cluster, similar to the elementary school, ideally between 6 and 8 students per cluster. We have multiple cluster classrooms in every school, and those teachers, like in elementary school, have very specific and regular ongoing training around how to differentiate. The reason that we only serve the students in a cluster model in English or language arts and social studies is because math is very unique and specialized for the students through middle school. Once they get to middle school, there is an entire second spreadsheet you get to look at for how they can progress through math. And we find that some of our GATE students move through that at a different rate, but not necessarily based on whether or not they've been identified for GATE services. So we want all students to have the opportunity to move through their math program at the rate that's best for them. In addition, science and their elective classes are differentiated regardless for all students, because when they're coming into middle school, most of the content and also the organization of the school itself is so different, and there's a learning curve there that the teachers are trained to differentiate for all levels within their rooms. So in all the models, both elementary and middle school, you'll notice that there's an academic and behavioral range within all groups. So regardless if you're in a cluster or if you're in a self-contained GATE classroom, there's a great deal of differentiation that has to happen. As we find, the reason the cluster model is structured the way that it is because we want to be able to limit the behavioral and academic needs. And so what we want to do is we want to make sure that our students have a like-minded or a like-gifted peer group, but we also want to make sure that the teacher has a smaller range of needs to differentiate for. And that is the same within a GATE self-contained class or a cluster classroom. Like I said, opportunities for like-minded peer interaction, that's going to happen in both models. And then last but not least, the differentiation strategies. There is no difference in the strategies that are used in the GATE cluster classrooms and the self-contained classroom. They actually utilize the same training model and the same trainer. That trainer works with us. We have a consultant that works from us from Arizona who is a specialist in gifted education, and she works with both our self-contained and cluster model teachers. And then rigor. I think this is an important word and something that we really want to identify of how we look at rigor. Rigor is how our teachers deliver the material. It is not the content or the curriculum itself. So all of our students, regardless of GATE services or not, receive the same curriculum and the same content standards. Those are identified through the state of California, nationwide. It is how we deliver them that ensures the level of rigor that is appropriate for our students. Our differentiation allows us to compact and enrich. So what you might see is not necessarily that there's any different curriculum or that they're moving through it faster, but that they're chunking things together because they're able to move on to some enrichment. So while they may be studying the exact same beginning content, students will have the ability to go deeper into that subject matter. Again, that speaks to the task complexity. So again, not different, but more complex, more enriched, more deep. You'll hear a lot of Socratic questioning. So the questioning models our teachers use in our gifted classrooms are very specific to the level in which the students need to be challenged. And then last but not least, and I'll speak to this one a little bit more, which is the opportunity for productive struggle. And this is one of the areas that we really know that our gifted students need support in. They haven't necessarily had the opportunity to work in an area of productive struggle because things have come naturally easy for them so far. So a lot of students who have always learned to read fast, they get their math facts quickly, they want to move on, they're ready for more. They haven't had to really struggle to learn at this point. And so this is where we really spend some time, not necessarily just on teaching more information, but making things more complex. So they're starting to learn how to be in a productive struggle where they're really asked to grow and to expand their knowledge and to think about their own learning and who they are as a learner. So just so you have an idea of what we're talking about with productive and destructive struggle, the The first is frustration. So one of the things that we really work on in our gifted classrooms is finding ways for students to see frustration as a challenge, something exciting, something to move them forward, rather than a thing that's going to shut you down. Like I said, a lot of our students have never had to work in that struggle zone because things have come easier. And so like that, they feel like this isn't a happy place. This is something I have to get through. And we want to give them tools to be able to move past it and expand rather than give up. Making sure that the learning goals feel attainable, that the effort that they put into something is worthwhile, that they're actually growing and learning because they really do love learning. Again, that it's destructive, it feels hazy, and they can't really understand what the point is. Like, why am I doing this? I feel like I already did it, or it doesn't seem like this is going to do anything for me in the long run. Productive struggle leads to students feeling really empowered and like they can do things and they can make changes, as opposed to destructive, where they feel like this is a waste of my time and I'm not adequate and I can't do it. And then the last is that mindset. The idea that I'm going to be able to do this. I may not know how to do it yet, but I'm going to get there. Versus the fixed mindset, which is, I'm done. I don't get it. I can't do it. I don't want to try it. And so that's something that we work a lot with on our students. All right, I'm going to give it back to Michelle to go over some of our demographics. Any questions on differentiation? Okay.
So a couple of years ago, we noticed a disparity, a pretty big disparity in our district demographics and our GATE program demographics. And specifically in this graph, you can see, or in this chart, you can see that our EL, English learner students, are seriously underrepresented. That was a red flag to us that we needed to change and modify our identification procedures to be more equitable. Because if you're doing it right, if you're identifying students correctly, you should be able to find students who are gifted in all areas. And so I guess your proof is when you're looking at these demographics, you should see that they are equal, that they're the same representation. So this year we're focusing not just, as in the last 2 years, not just on our English learner students, but students who are socioeconomically disadvantaged. Our special needs students as well. So when we were talking earlier about really looking at students in like groups, that's where this comes into play. We also changed the mode that we were doing our first screening. Before we had used an opt-in, and now we use an opt-out. And by changing just that one piece where parents had to opt out of testing rather than opting in, we were able to increase drastically not just our total number of students that we were able to screen, but specifically our English learners. And what that allowed us to do was cast a wider net. By getting more students through this process, we were able to then look deeply at different student groups and identify those gifted learners. And then this just takes those numbers and rolls them into third, fourth, and fifth grade and the total number screen. And you can see a huge jump in the number of students that we screened last year because of that opt-out process. And so not only were we able to capture more third grade students, but we also were able to go back and get fourth and fifth grade students who may not have opted into testing. So that's why those numbers were so much higher. And then this is a little bit of our historic data where we went back in time and looked at the percentage of identification. And you can see when we're talking about the percent of English learners, it remained at 0 for many years in spite of the district working to change the identification practices. And it wasn't until 2 years ago where we really started to have an impact. And then you can see now we're tracking socioeconomically disadvantaged students, as well as, it's not up there, but special needs students. So this year, we hope to have a broader reach and a more model that is duplicating what we see in our district demographics. So this year, what are we changing in our screening? We changed the way that we're communicating with our GATE parents and with the potential GATE population. We sent out newsletters to all third grade families and fourth and fifth grade families about the reevaluation process. And what that allowed us to do was it was more effective in reaching parents, and it circumvented the teacher. So lighten the teacher's load and go directly to parents. And if parents did not have an email, we mailed them a hard copy. So we felt like we really were able to get the word out a little bit better this year. We also extended our GATE screening window. So we only would assess in January. We opened it up to be December, and the reason for that was to lower student anxiety around the testing. So it's spread out over a longer period of time, and so students don't get anxious about what the test is and when it's given. So, and it also allows the teachers and the test coordinators more flexibility when giving the test. So it's a nicer, kinder pace. The GATE student study team will then be meeting in mid-February. So all the month of January and early February, what we're doing is we're pulling in student work samples, and I'll be talking a little bit about what those different work samples look like. But we have a lot of information to gather, so that's why you see such a big long time between when that first screening occurs and then when the GATE student study team meets. And then our parent notification will be sent home in early March, and which will give parents plenty of time to go on the different tours, because it's really important for parents to make that personal decision with their child about what program they would like to what model works best for their family. And the best way to see the different models is to go on those tours and really experience it firsthand. So here's a little bit of the information about the data pieces that we look at. We look at both quantitative and qualitative data. So the cognitive abilities test, that's our first screening method. That's what we give our third graders and new fourth and fifth graders. And that is really, it's not an IQ test. It just looks at how students think. And that's broken into 3 different battery of tests, the verbal, the nonverbal, and the quantitative section. And so it really identifies where a student's strengths lie. We also look at measures of academic progress, or it's called MAP, and you may be familiar with it because we use it for all students. And that gives us even another deeper look into a student's academic ability. We also use MARS assessments, and you may be familiar with those. Those are math assessments, and they're designed to have a low entry point and a high ceiling. So what that means is that when students take a MARS task or a MARS assessment, every student should have access to the basic question. And then the question gets more and more complex as the student works through it. So it really shows you that critical thinking and just how far a student can take those math concepts on their own. It's key that they have to show their work, and they have to be able to explain their thinking. So they can't just say, write this equals that. They have to explain why does it look like that. We also look at self-testing in terms of is a student making more progress than would normally be expected, moving 2 levels in 1 year. We look at writing samples to get a feel for how a student is writing based on grade level samples. And we look at referrals from teachers, and parents can refer, principals can refer. That's another window into the student's learning. And then we take into consideration cultural, special needs, socioeconomic needs. That's where we're really looking at terms and students in terms of those student groups. So each one of those pieces is an entry point into the GATE identification. But in order to be identified, your child needs to show very high achievement in several different areas. So, but there is no one recipe that we look at because, as you know, kids are all unique and different. So you see anomalies. You see kids who stand out in one area more than others. So sometimes we'll go back to the teacher and we'll ask for more work samples. So this is kind of an overview of the pieces that we pull to enter students into that identification process. And so this year, the first step that we go through is the COGAT, and parents can opt out of the COGAT if they wish. And then we work this next month in January and early February to collect and compile all those different pieces of data. And then once we get all of that information together into a student portfolio, the student study team meets to review all the data. And the student study team is made up of myself and Jen and the director of instruction and innovation and the principal of the Linwood Self-Contained program, and another principal within the district. And we also have a psychologist who joins us, who informs us on students who may have those anomalies in scoring so they can explain it further for us. And if a student does have special needs, they can explain how that would affect their testing. And then after the GATE student study team meets, we make our recommendation, and we send notification to parents shortly thereafter. And now Jen's going to talk to you a little bit about another component of the GATE program, which is the GATE leadership team.
Thank you. So it's very important to us that we have a strong communication and team mentality around serving our gifted students. So we've put together a GATE leadership team. We've had it, I'm going to say, in this format for the last 3 years. Okay. And as you can see, we have equal representation for the most part from our community and from our district. So this is a team of parents. You'll notice there's representation from 4th and 5th grade at the Linwood Self-Contained School, but then we also have representation from the cluster models in 4th and 5th grade as well. And then the middle schools each have a representative. On the NUSD side, again, it's Ms. Stevens, Michelle, myself, and then our instructional coach who works with our GATE teachers, and then teachers within the program, both from the middle school and the elementary school, cluster and non-cluster. And of course, we have our board member who's involved as well, and that board member rotates through. All right, our objective is to bring teachers together with the community. So we have parents, administrators, and teachers along with our board representation to give feedback about what's happening in the classrooms and talk about any kinds of questions or concerns that may come up around the program. But really, it's a discussion around how are we going to make sure that we're serving our students in the best way possible. Again, the membership includes the people that were listed before. We meet 4 times a year. In addition, a lot of our committee members come to evenings like this and help us prepare and even sometimes present at parent nights. And then it's a 2-year commitment, so we're on a rotation to ensure that all of our schools have representation on a rotating basis. And then some of the activities we work on. We do spend a lot of time giving models and examples of what the instructional strategies look like. We know that if you don't spend a lot of time in the trainings around what differentiation looks like for gifted students, it's hard to identify. When you walk into a room, it often looks exactly the same for everyone, unless you know what you're looking for. And so we do spend a lot of time in our leadership meetings where teachers, instructional coaches, even our consultant will give examples of what to look for or give examples of the types of questioning you may hear. We've done model lessons, videos, things of that nature to really help the community understand what that differentiation looks like, the kinds of questions to ask your student. We all know that when you ask your student, "What'd you do today?" They usually respond with, "I don't know," or "nothing." But giving them some ideas of what to ask and how to ask so that you can see what learning is happening and often recognize some of the differentiation skills that our teachers are using. We do also discuss student data and metrics. So this is the team who will work on the student survey and the parent survey. So we give an opportunity for everyone involved in our program to give feedback. So not only does this team help create that survey, but also looking at the results and really deciding what those results say about our program and if there's any need for change, what that would look like. And then discussing input, questions, and concerns. And again, this is a leadership team, so we really hope that as a part of a community, that the members of the team, teachers, administrators, and parents are coming to the table with the concerns and questions that they may be hearing, because we want to make sure that our communication is strong and consistent and that everyone is hearing the same message. And then last but not least, developing our initial mission statement and kind of working through that and really what is our overall goal, what is our vision for this program. And that team has been an integral part of us kind of putting that together. All right. With that, I think we have time for questions about any of what we just heard or something that we missed and you would like to know more about.
So if you do have a question, because this is being recorded, we set up a little mic right over there so you can just hit the little green button there, and that way we'll record your question, okay?
Yeah. Do I actually have to go up and hit some green button? Or? You could ask it, I could repeat it. How about that? You can ask it and I'll repeat. We're all tired tonight.
What does this mean, assuming my granddaughter is going to get into this program, what does this mean as far as changes in her daily life, like the homework load, stress level, these things? What changes will this mean on a daily basis for an average child?
So when I say differentiated, really each of these students, and not just our students who are receiving GATE services, but all students, really have a program that is fit to their needs. And so I wouldn't expect any dramatic change in a homework load or stress levels in that way. If anything, I think that what our goal is with this program is that there's an increase in engagement and the student feels like their needs are being met on a day-to-day basis. And for many of our students, their needs are very well being met because their teachers are always already fantastic at differentiating, and this might just be a time when they have other students in their class that are more intentionally grouped for like-minded conversation and collaboration. Is there anything you want to add to that?
And it's not about more. It's not about busy work. It's about really helping children to access the rigor and that depth and complexity of the curriculum. So our teachers are trained in that, and it's more a way of shifting that instructional model for the students to engage them more deeply.
Go ahead, I'll repeat it. Mhm.
picture in gait. There's other issues that are assessed as well, but I'm just wondering if you're interested in that whole picture.
Okay, so the question was, are we interested in outside testing from what we provide here at the district? And I'm actually going to let Ms. Stevens answer that.
So we are actually not allowed to look at outside testing. And the reason is because it creates an inequitable situation where parents who can provide that outside testing will, and parents who can't aren't able to. So we have to use the same testing evidence and data for every student to be equitable. So unfortunately, we cannot use that. But what you can do is when you're filling out the reevaluation form, you can say in that you, due to these reasons, you had your child looked at, and this is why you're moving to have your child reevaluated, because you got this information and you'd like us to look further. The more that you can call out in the reevaluation form, the areas of strength where you can direct our gaze at the data. So if your child is very strong in, say, math, you would want to call that out in the letter so that we know where to look. Even though we're looking at everything, it's always helpful to get more information.
Okay, but not as part of the initial eval, just if we were to go through a reevaluator. Right?
So they've never been screened before using the cognitive abilities test?
Well, no, he had an IQ test as part of the formal assessment when he was younger, but he hasn't been screened for that yet.
So is your child a third grader? Yes. Okay. So the cognitive abilities test is not an IQ test. It is it's an abilities test in that it's assessing how students think. So the way that it's designed is to kind of that low entry point, high ceiling again, where kids can access the questions, but then they get more and more complex throughout it. So it's really looking at the different strengths of children.
So the question was, when is the test administered? And this year the test will be administered anytime between, could have already, I believe we opened it in December, so December through January, so the end of January. No, each school has a testing coordinator. And, do you want to go ahead?
So I'm so sorry, I can't. I know, we're so short, I can't see. So because each site is testing so many classes and so many students, we don't let parents know that your child's going to be taking the test on whatever day. It is 3 batteries of tests. So it's actually, we space it out purposely so that the kids don't get overwhelmed. So just like any other school day, you would just send your child ready to learn and do their best work. And it's not something that you can study for. It's not like studying for an algebra test or a math test. It's something in the way that they're thinking. It's basically breaking down how students process.
Just to follow up, sorry. So once you're in the GATE program, do you stay there or do you have to test every year?
So the question was, once you're identified as gifted, that do you need to retest every year? And once you are identified, you are in. You don't get exited from the program. Now, you can certainly always refuse services. You can say, I'm happy where I am and my child's happy and it's all good. But your child is always part of the gifted program once we've identified them. So.
Can I also just clarify on that too? Each school district who does provide a GATE program has their own identification process. So while you would never be exited from our GATE program, there would be another evaluation system outside of Novato should you ever move. Just like students who come into our district after 3rd grade screening, if they've done some other kind of screening in their last district, they do have to rescreen here in Novato.
Any other questions? Great. Well, Thank you so much for coming out this evening. If you find that you have more questions, please feel free to email either myself or Jennifer Larson. Our names and email addresses are on the district website. So thanks again, and I hope we answered all your questions tonight. Have a good evening.